The room had no windows. Its walls were lined with cardboard boxes instead of mirrors, shelves of thread instead of perfume. A single bulb hung from a cord in the center, swaying gently like the last breath of ambition in a forgotten dream. Beneath it, hunched over a battered wooden table, the girl worked in silence. Not because she was obedient, but because silence was all she had ever known. It wrapped around her like fabric no one wanted to wear, thin, worn, but stubborn. Her name was Amara, and long before anyone knew it, it was whispered between pins and pleats, stitched into the linings of clothes no one credited her for. She grew up in the tight corners of New York's garment district, behind the scenes where beauty was born but never acknowledged. Her mother worked 3 floors up in a factory that produced wedding dresses for private labels, never her own. She taught Amara how to cut fabric with fingers that had been blistered by decades of work for other people's dreams. Her father had vanished before Amara turned 8, but not before leaving behind a single relic, an old Singer sewing machine, rusted at the edges, pedal bent from weight, but still running like defiance with each stomp. Amara learned fashion in fragments, fabric scraps from discarded bins, sketchbooks made from the backs of invoices, needles she wasn't supposed to keep. She wasn't taught at an academy. She studied mannequins in display windows and stole glances at runway shows through glass and velvet ropes. She never spoke. She watched, and then, when no one else was watching, she created. Her first full dress was built from curtains a hotel threw out after a renovation. Floor length, high collar, embroidered trim she hand-stitched over 2 months while pretending to do homework. It was flawed and glorious and unmistakably hers. No one saw it but her mother. She cried. But tears did not pay for heat. So Amara went to work. At 15, she forged a work ID and took a job as a finisher, ironing seams, cleaning up after tailors too proud to look down. She listened to their gossip about upcoming collections, about real designers, about who got invited where. She kept her head low, her sketchbook hidden in her lunch bag, her dreams tucked behind stitched lips. At 17, she applied to fashion school using a portfolio built from trash and talent. They rejected her. Twice. The third time, a professor saw something. An asymmetrical hem on a cocktail dress drawn with such tension it looked like it might tear through the page. He let her in, on probation, with no aid. She cleaned classrooms at night to cover the cost of thread. Fashion school didn't break her, it sharpened her. She watched as classmates mocked her thrift store outfits and fabric scraps. She watched professors fawn over the legacy kids, the ones with fashion in their last names and family connections sewn into their futures. She sat in the back row and learned not from applause, but from failure. She submitted her designs quietly. They won quietly. Her name was printed in a font so small the press forgot to mention it. But the people who mattered saw. One day, a recruiter from Paris took her hand and asked her if she could produce a capsule collection in 6 months. She lied and said yes, then didn't sleep for 3. She built dresses in the back of her cousin's barbershop, stored gowns in garment bags beneath pool tables, hired an undocumented seamstress to help, paid her cash from cleaning jobs. She sourced fabric from liquidation bins and deadstock markets. And when her first model stepped out under the lights in a show buried at the bottom of Paris Fashion Week, something shifted. Buyers didn't clap. They stared. Because the dresses weren't just beautiful, they were angry. They were contradictions. High collars and open backs. Sculpted pleats stitched with thread pulled from uniforms. It was war and grace. Silence and scream. She was 23, and she was a name no one could pronounce yet, but no one could ignore. The fashion house that reached out was not the biggest, but it was hungry. They offered her a position as ghost designer, a whisper in the machine, someone who would craft brilliance behind the brand, nameless and paid in prestige. She agreed. She had no choice. Exposure was currency. Visibility was rent. For 2 years, she worked under their roof but never walked the carpet. Her designs walked instead. On red carpets, at galas, in magazines where her name never appeared. Dresses she birthed from grief were renamed after actresses. Her sketches were reattributed. When she asked for her name in the credits, they reminded her of where she came from. They called it industry standard. She called it theft. But she wasn't ready yet, so she watched. She learned. She built a map. Who owned what? Which supplier skimmed fabric? Which model was paid in exposure? Which investor had a mistress who secretly leaked collection photos? She learned the real pattern behind fashion. Power stitched into silence. And then she disappeared. No announcement. No scandal. Just vanished. Rumors spread. Some said she married rich. Others claimed she burned out. A few whispered about immigration issues. But Amara didn't vanish. She returned home. To the windowless room. To the old singer. To the dust and the heat. She pulled out her oldest sketchbook, the one no one had seen, and started sewing again. The world didn't notice when she came back. No headlines. No press releases. No runway gossip columns fawning over her return. The industry that once fed off her creativity had long moved on to its next darling, its newest muse with the same last name as a fashion house etched into Parisian stone. But Amara didn't come back to be noticed. She came back to reclaim what was stolen, one stitch at a time. Her first designs were built in the quiet, hidden in a storage unit in Brooklyn, lit by a single bare bulb and powered by a portable generator that hummed like a sleeping beast. She worked in the dead hours of night, surrounded by cardboard boxes filled with discarded silk, crushed velvet, and unfinished patterns that once belonged to dreams put on pause. Her hands remembered everything. The feel of fabric under tension, the way bias cuts lived or died on a mannequin's shoulder, the geometry of motion, the weight of silence. She didn't sketch anymore. She sculpted, direct to fabric. No middleman, no translation. And then she named it. Not the dress, the brand. Unclaimed. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't polite. It was a manifesto, a declaration from every ghost designer, every overlooked seamstress, every stolen sketch and unpaid intern. A line for those who built beauty and were told to stay behind the curtain. The logo was raw, black on black, embossed like a bruise. No flowery serif fonts, just truth. She funded the brand herself, sold everything, cashed in what little was left in a forgotten savings account, took a gig designing costumes for an off-Broadway show under a pseudonym. It wasn't glamorous, but it was clean. With the money, she leased a loft. Sparse, cold, concrete floors and exposed beams. She filled it with machines, mannequins, rolls of muslin, scissors dulled from years of overuse. She didn't decorate, didn't celebrate. She simply created. For 6 months, she worked without showing a soul. Each piece she made carried a secret story. Dresses inspired by factory shifts, coats shaped like silence, collars that stood like shields. She used discarded buttons from antique stores and paired them with lines cut like battle scars. Each garment had a name, not a number. The witness, the one they ignored. Inheritance. Her collection wasn't fashion. It was revenge. She photographed them herself. In alleys, on subway platforms, in laundromats at 2 a.m. Models were dancers and waitresses, nurses and custodians, people with posture shaped by work, not privilege. She didn't pose them. She let them stand. The photos were uploaded to a single website. No press kit. No editorials. Just a store with 20 pieces and one banner. Unclaimed. For the ones who were never seen. She didn't promote it. She just waited. And then it happened. The first order came from an anonymous email. Then another. Then 5. Then a message from someone in Berlin, asking to represent the line. She said no. Another from Tokyo. Then from LA, someone sent her photo to a stylist. The stylist dressed a rising pop star in The One They Ignored for an award show. The next morning, the site crashed from traffic. A week later, someone from the boutique called, not to apologize, to inquire about a purchase order. They didn't know it was her. They just knew the brand was moving fast, selling out, being whispered in dressing rooms and casting calls. Unclaimed was becoming a name, and no one knew the woman behind it. That anonymity became mystique. Fashion blogs speculated. A French collective? Ex-Margiela team? Some thought it was an AI experiment. None of them guessed it was the woman they once told not to touch the dress. Then came the invitation. Fashion Week. Not New York. Not Paris. Accra. It was the first time she said yes. She didn't fly first class. She didn't bring PR. She packed the collection herself, ironed the pieces one by one in a borrowed flat, and stitched the final seam in the back of a taxi. The show was held in an open-air warehouse at dusk, with lights hung like street lamps and music that pulsed like memory. When her models walked, they didn't float, they marched. The audience didn't applaud, they held their breath. By the end of the show, 3 global buyers had approached her. One offered her 7 figures for licensing. She said no. Another offered to buy the brand. She smiled. She flew home alone, window seat, and unpacked her garments herself. In the weeks that followed, the fashion world scrambled. Editors begged for interviews. Influencers posted knockoffs. Competing labels rushed to replicate her cuts, failing to capture the essence. Because they didn't understand. Amara's clothes weren't trend. They were testimony. And she hadn't even begun to speak yet. The invitation was printed on thick cardstock, the kind that didn't bend. Gilded edges, serif fonts, the scent of pressed lavender sealed in an envelope so heavy it felt more like a summons than a request. It came not through email or courier, but in the hands of a white-gloved assistant who waited exactly 32 seconds at her studio door before sliding it under the frame and vanishing without a trace. Amara didn't open it right away. She already knew what it was. The Paris Grand Atelier, one of the most exclusive showcases in European couture. Not a fashion show. A ritual. Held inside a former cathedral-turned-gallery space where ceilings towered like judgments and every chair was assigned with surgical care. Only 20 designers were chosen each year. Never newcomers. Never the uninvited. But this year, they broke tradition. Because they had no choice. Her brand had done the unthinkable, it had broken past gatekeeping. No runway debut. No celebrity endorsements. No family legacy. And yet Unclaimed was not just being worn, it was being watched. The pieces whispered into editorials like insurgent thoughts. Stylists began reshaping whole shoots around one coat, one sleeve, one button from her line. Museum curators requested samples. One piece was even seen on a queen, not a metaphorical one, but a literal sovereign. So Paris did what power always does when challenged. It reached out and tried to absorb what it could not control. Amara accepted the invitation. Not out of vanity, but precision. She had something to show them. In the days leading up to the showcase, she worked in near isolation. No stylists. No sponsors. No handlers. She poured herself into the pieces like someone writing a final statement. Her collection was called Stone Archive, a quiet reference to every idea, sketch, and silhouette they had once buried. She brought them back to life, but not as nostalgia. As weaponry. The dresses weren't soft. They cut. Asymmetry met architecture. Drapes collapsed into steel wire boning. Lace wrapped around canvas. One coat had a full bodice made of melted acetate shaped to mimic erosion because erosion, she believed, was just slow violence made beautiful. Another piece was stitched entirely in reverse, seams exposed like wounds made public. Every garment told a truth, and they were tired of being polite about it. On the day of the show, the cathedral trembled with preparation. Chandeliers glistened. The aisle, once meant for saints and priests, now waited for models who would become altars. Outside, the city whirred with speculation. Who was this woman? How had she arrived here? Some said she was an heiress in disguise. Others believed she was a performance artist. The truth, that she was the seamstress they once dismissed, was too inconvenient to believe. Backstage, Amara moved through the chaos like smoke. No chaos touched her. She adjusted pleats herself, clipped threads with her own shears. Models watched her not with curiosity, but reverence. They understood something sacred was happening, something older than fashion and deeper than fame. When the lights dimmed and the first figure stepped into the runway glow, a silence swept the room. The audience did not blink. They watched, because the dresses were not just garments. They were indictments, ghosts of forgotten labor, elegies in chiffon, memoirs trapped in thread. Midway through the show, one of the fashion house owners who once exploited her work leaned forward in his chair. He recognized a cut, a pattern she had submitted under NDA, rejected, then seen walk his own runway under another name. Except this version, it was elevated, sharpened, precise. She hadn't just taken it back. She had finished it. When the final model stepped out, wrapped in a dress made of shattered mirrors layered over silk, the room held its breath. It reflected every face back at itself. Every eye met its own. There was no escaping it. It was fashion, yes, but it was also confession. When the lights returned, Amara did not walk the runway. She stood in the shadows, behind a column, watching as the room slowly came to terms with what they had seen. There were no gasps, no cheering, just the weight of recognition. She had not played by their rules. She had rewritten them. The press tried to find her afterward. She declined all interviews. The photographers crowded the models instead. She walked home alone. That night, she returned to her studio. She didn't celebrate. She didn't post. She stitched one more dress by hand, in silence. It wasn't for sale. It wasn't for show. It was for the girl she used to be. The one who was told she couldn't touch the dress. The boutique was the last place she expected to see it. A storefront in London's Mayfair district, nestled between an antique watchmaker and a gallery that sold nothing under 5 figures. Clean glass, marble facade. Inside, halos of warm light suspended over minimalist mannequins. It was the kind of place where time moved slower, where the silence of wealth was curated to feel like holiness. And there, just beyond the glass, half-turned, half-exalted, was the dress. Her dress. But this time, no mistake. It wasn't a replica or derivative. It wasn't inspired by or stolen in concept. It was hers, pulled directly from her collection, labeled and priced like a relic. In the corner of the window, a golden plaque read, "Designed exclusively for Mayfair House by Unclaimed." She hadn't signed that deal. She hadn't authorized the display. But someone had taken liberties again. Amara stood on the curb, coat drawn against the cold. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass. Older now, sharper. The girl with ink-stained fingers had become a woman with a name, but that didn't stop theft from evolving. It just got more polite. She entered the boutique. Instantly, the stillness changed. 2 saleswomen flanked the floor, their eyes drawn like needles toward the thread out of place. They offered the standard smile, but it was brittle, performative, as if they were trained to detect the price tag of a person's presence by her posture alone. She didn't speak. She moved through the space slowly, past curated racks and curated glances, until she reached the pedestal. Up close, the dress shimmered less. The lighting was too harsh. The mannequin too stiff. The body it was shaped for, fluid, imperfect, real, had been replaced by plastic exactness. Then came the voice. Soft, clipped, dismissive. "Please don't touch the garment." It was the boutique manager. Tailored suit, polished smile, eyes hard behind her charm. A beat of silence passed. Amara turned. The manager didn't recognize her. Not in her neutral-toned coat, her flat shoes, her plain face absent of makeup. Not without the armor of acclaim. She saw a woman she assumed was here to browse, maybe to imitate, definitely not to belong. "You can't touch that dress," the manager said again, louder now, firmer. A few heads turned. An older customer raised an eyebrow. The air tightened. Amara reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. She opened the legal folder, pulled up the licensing agreement for Unclaimed's boutique contracts, highlighted the clause stating no unsanctioned resale or exclusive display, and tapped the manager's name badge into the frame. Then she showed her the name listed under the brand's ownership. The manager stared, then blinked. Her eyes moved from the screen to the woman in front of her. And for the first time, she saw her. She didn't apologize. She stammered. Amara didn't wait. She walked past her, past the silent mannequins, and through a side hallway where she found the dress's tag. It was folded, half-hidden, but there, stitched beneath the satin hem, was her signature. Not printed, sewn. She ran her fingers across the lining. It was real. She had always put her name where they couldn't erase it. That night, she issued a statement. Not to the press, to the people. A video posted on the Unclaimed site. No music, no filter. Just her hands unfolding dresses, showing the signatures in the linings, one by one. Dresses worn on red carpets, on magazine covers, on women who had never known her name. She didn't accuse. She documented. In the days that followed, a movement began. Hashtag check the lining. Design students posted their hidden tags. Dressmakers showed embroidered initials inside gowns sold under other names. Retail workers whispered truths about who really stitched what. And just like that, the conversation changed. No longer about trends, about authorship. The industry panicked. Boutiques scrambled to verify their labels. Design houses issued preemptive acknowledgments, trying to get ahead of what they saw coming. But Amara wasn't chasing apologies. She was building evidence. She launched a sublabel, Reclaimed, built from rejected sketches submitted under NDAs. One dress at a time, she took back what they buried. Not with lawsuits, with visibility, public, documented, irrevocable. When museums requested to exhibit her work, she declined. Instead, she created a traveling exhibit of her own. Not behind glass, but in abandoned warehouses, libraries, community centers. Every dress was paired with a story, what it became, who erased it, where it now lived. She gave free entry to students. She gave a sewing machine to every school that hosted her. And she spoke only once at the last exhibit stop. 100 people sat before her. She held up the original sketch of the first dress they said she couldn't touch. She said nothing. She flipped it over. And on the back, written in pencil, faint but unshakable, keep your name in the lining. They can steal everything else. The invitation arrived on letterhead embossed in platinum ink, signed with a flourish by a name that once belonged to an empire. It wasn't a request. It was an opportunity dressed in elegance. A keynote at the Global Fashion Equity Summit in Milan, an event previously reserved for legacy designers, industry heirs, and the anointed few who had worn invisibility as a shield of power. This time, however, the invitation was different. It wasn't addressed to unclaimed. It was addressed to Amara E. Soul. Her full name, not abbreviated, not anonymized, not buried in the footnotes. It had taken a decade for the industry to spell her name correctly. Now they had no choice. She boarded the flight in silence, carrying only a small suitcase and a worn garment bag containing one dress. The one they had tried to take. Not the version polished for Paris. The original, stitched with uneven thread, dyed by hand, embroidered with lace scavenged from thrift store bins. It wasn't perfect, but it had something the others didn't. It remembered. The summit was held inside a museum that once housed royal furniture. The irony was thick enough to cut with tailor's shears. Every hallway echoed with heels and controlled laughter. Perfume hung in the air like static. Panels discussed inclusion with slides curated by marketing teams. Photos of glossy diversity smiled down from digital billboards paid for by brands with histories like locked closets. Amara did not sit at the tables. She observed from corners. She watched a famous creative director use her silhouette, her signature pleated waistline, and claim it as homage. She watched a trend forecaster present a case study based on authentic Black narratives in couture, citing numbers, never names. She heard her own garments referenced as momentum, as if they were clouds not carved from blood and time. When she stepped onto the stage for her session, no one clapped. She didn't need them to. The lights dimmed and she walked slowly, carefully, as if each footfall counted for something. She wore a plain black tunic, her hair wrapped, no jewelry, no applause bait. The screen behind her displayed one image, a needle. Silver. Slightly bent. Illuminated like a relic. She did not speak. She unpacked the dress. Held it up. Turned it inside out. Showed the stitching. Held it again. And then projected the original invoice next to it, the amount she was paid for the design when it was first stolen, $170. Next to it, a recent auction house listing. Same dress, new label. Sold for $48,000. Then came the images, magazine spreads, gala photos, fashion week runways. The same lines. The same drapes. The same hands never credited. She did not name names. She didn't need to. The truth was tailored into every slide. By the time she finished, the room was quiet in a way that no applause could penetrate. Some people looked down. Others stared forward, frozen. A few executives left early. She stepped off stage and walked into the next part of her plan. She wasn't here to shame the industry. She was here to replace it. 2 weeks later, she announced the Lining Fund, an equity-backed, self-owned grant program built to provide infrastructure for independent designers of color. No middlemen. No gatekeepers. Each applicant submitted their work anonymously and each recipient retained 100% ownership. Her only requirement? Every garment had to include the designer's name stitched visibly into the lining. It caused uproar. Established houses complained. They accused her of arrogance, of politicizing fashion, of biting the hand that feeds. Investors pulled out of competing labels. Social media exploded. Influencers called her disruptive. Historians called her unprecedented. Streetwear brands called her family. She said nothing. She just kept creating. Her next collection dropped under a new sublabel, Witness. No runways, no boutiques, just direct to client. Every dress was delivered with a handwritten note and a QR code that linked to a video showing who stitched it, where, when, and why. Fashion critics called it radical transparency. She called it the truth. The pieces sold out in 12 hours. A week later, a luxury department store tried to resell one of her earlier dresses at double its original price without credit. She bought it anonymously, then donated it to a domestic abuse shelter in Queens. The shelter displayed it in their lobby, glass case and all, with a new plaque. This dress was made by a woman who was told she didn't belong. It now protects women who were told the same. Amara didn't give interviews, but her actions spoke in thread and thunder. Her influence reshaped markets. Designers began inserting their names visibly, citing the Amara rule. Fashion schools rewrote curriculum. One city proposed a law requiring textile attribution for garments over $5,000 in retail. Legacy brands scrambled to appear ethical, releasing decades-late acknowledgments that landed like confessions. But none of that mattered as much as the messages. They came daily. From girls. From elders. From young designers in Lagos, in Detroit, in Manila. Stories of struggle. Of stolen dreams. Of quiet revenge. Of needles passed down like torches. She read them all. She didn't reply to most. She replied with movement. She replied by staying visible. She replied by never again asking permission. Because the girl who was told she couldn't touch the dress? Now she owned the factory. The building sat quietly at the edge of the city, wrapped in steel and shadow, a former garment factory that once churned out mass-produced uniforms in anonymity. It had long since shut its doors, too slow, too local, too unwilling to digitize. The owners sold it for pennies on the dollar, not knowing what it would become. Amara didn't renovate it. She resurrected it. The sign above the door said only one word. Found. Inside, the concrete floors still bore oil stains from machines that hummed for decades without praise. The walls still whispered stories and lint. But now, those stories had witnesses. The factory was quiet but alive. Work tables lined the open space in rows, not ranks. The sewing machines were new, silent runners imported from Osaka, but the chairs were reclaimed wood, sanded by hand. Natural light spilled through wide-pane windows, warming bolts of fabric stacked like memory. Music played low from a single speaker in the back. It was never loud. Respect was louder. Amara walked the floor without fanfare. She didn't hover. She didn't command. She listened. A hem here. A shoulder slope there. She guided with nods, with eyes. Her staff, once called interns in places that barely paid them, now wore name tags stitched onto their aprons with the label Maker. Not employee. Not operator. Maker. Each piece crafted here was logged, cataloged, archived. Every name listed. Every hour compensated. The work was slow. By design. The industry called it non-scalable. She called it right. At the far end of the factory was a vault. Not for money. For memory. Inside it, wrapped in acid-free tissue, hung 100 pieces that had never been sold. Her personal archive. Each one marked with a note, a date, a story. The first coat she made after reclaiming her name. The silk jumpsuit that was copied by a French conglomerate. The mirrored dress that shut down a runway. And in the center, on its own hanger, under its own light. The dress. The one that had sparked it all. The one they told her not to touch. Its lining bore her signature 3 times. Because once wasn't enough anymore. The vault wasn't for clients. It wasn't for show. It was for students. Once a week, she opened the doors and let design students from any background, any school, walk the aisles. No appointments. No permission. Just presence. She taught them how to see past fabric. To read thread like biography. To feel pain in pleats. To translate struggle into structure. No tuition. No gate. Just lineage. Outside of fashion, the world took notice. Unclaimed was referenced in political journals, in cultural essays, in history classrooms. One of her pieces was selected for a time capsule in Geneva. Another was cast in bronze by an artist who had once been homeless, wearing her coats for warmth. She never cashed the check from the Met Gala. She donated it to textile workers in Dhaka. She never spoke at luxury brand panels. She hosted her own roundtables at laundromats, in school gyms, in mosques and community centers. Anywhere fabric lived. She showed girls how to thread a needle not as a hobby but as a weapon. Years passed, and yet she stayed rooted. The world kept changing around her. Magazines begged for retrospectives. She declined. Awards piled up in the back closet. She ignored them. She didn't want worship. She wanted continuity. She began mentoring not just designers but pattern cutters, tailors, logistics minds. She taught them not just how to create but how to keep. Ownership. Narrative. Silence as a weapon. Voice as a stitch. Control not as performance but as blueprint. On the 10th anniversary of Unclaimed, her staff surprised her. They unveiled a full retrospective show in the factory itself, one garment for every year, displayed alongside quotes from the people who made them. Not buyers. Not critics. The makers. At the end of the hallway there was a new piece, a dress no one had seen. It was plain, black, seamless, invisible stitching, no embellishments. But inside, sewn into the lining from collar to hem, were the names of every woman who had ever written her. Every letter she'd received. Every name denied credit. Every hand that went unacknowledged. It wasn't for sale. It wasn't to be worn. It was to be remembered. When the exhibit opened, the first person to enter was a girl. 13. Backpack. Eyes wide. She walked past the display cases in silence. When she reached the final piece, she stood there for 6 minutes, then asked if she could touch it. No one stopped her, because that was the point. Later that night, when the factory was empty and the machines were asleep, Amara sat at her old desk. The same one from her first apartment, now reinforced but still scratched with memory. She opened a fresh piece of muslin, drew a new sketch, a silhouette, a shape, something between armor and poetry. She smiled faintly. She knew they would copy it. They would dilute it, misname it, rewrite it, but they would never unmake her. Because every time a girl was told she couldn't touch the dress, she would remember the one who made it.